you have to be open-minded if you're going to really appreciate music. If you have all these rules on like what you won't, will and won't listen to, it's like you've already kind of painted yourself into a box, and that's like the opposite of like what creativity is about, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Referring to like like the jazz trap like project, where, like you said, you envisioned, or like you started thinking about it like almost 12 years ago. Like,
yeah.
what was it about the jazz and like hip hop or trap that you were trying to like, why were you trying to fuse the two?
I mean, I think the main reason, the main inspiration for it. So, like I said, I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. So 3-6 Mafia was around us in high school. Like our marching bands, everyone was playing 3-6 Mafia songs as like the marching bands would compete. It was just like, you know, because this is back in, I graduated high school in 02. So this is like right before they, you know, they hadn't won like their Oscar yet, I don't think, at that point. I mean, like they weren't really on the map. They were locally known in like the South and like Atlanta and all that, but it wasn't in like that tri-state area, but it wasn't like a nationally recognized name. So, and they do to some degree, 3-6 Mafia, I don't know if you would say they started trap music, but they definitely were like super influential on like the whole trap music movement. So I think seeing firsthand how that energy translated, whether it was like in the high school football crowds or just, you know, you went to a party and people were putting 3-6 Mafia on, or people were driving down the street with like, you know, their 2 subwoofers in their truck, you know, and they're bumping it.
Just bumping.
It's just like, it, you know, that at that time in that local environment, like it was just like an energy that I'd never seen in any other type of music form before. But then also being in the high school band, and like I said, like at one point I was composing. I remember I had Finale. Have you heard of that program?
Yeah.
So my band director, he gave me Finale because he saw that I was like making beats. I don't know if he saw that I was making beats, but he knew I had that creative side of making music. And I think I asked him for a copy of it because I heard that he had it. And I remember arranging. At the time, I forgot about Dre was like big, like, you know, Dre and Eminem. So I arranged that for all the parts in our band. So playing that, the football games. And I'd see people go crazy, you know, hearing like those types of songs. So, you know, I liked the energy that hip hop was bringing to people. Like, you know, you could see that. And at the same time, everyone was playing this, we're all musicians, and a lot of us were in the jazz band. And, you know, you play your jazz concert and the crowd would clap, you know, it was fine. They liked it, but it wasn't that same response. And so I was trying to figure out how could you know, all these talented musicians around me, they're great at jazz and they also love hip hop and 3-6 Mafia and that whole movement. Like there's got to be a way to kind of marry those two energies, and at least those two skill sets. And for me, it was the first time I got into production. This guy named KT Townsend, he's a keyboard player and he's played for like the Jackson 5. He's been touring with them. The brothers still do their thing. And he's played with, you know, he's been like Christina Aguilera's keyboardist and all that. And the drummer in our jazz band, his name is Stanley Randolph, and he's Stevie Wonder's drummer. So like all these like incredible musicians that were around me in high school. So Kenneth, the keyboardist, he would use the chord Trinity, or not, actually use the chord Triton for our jazz band. And if you know the chord Triton, it has like a floppy disk drive, and you could see it had a sequencer in there, so you could play, you know, keyboard. You could play like piano riffs on it, and you could add drum sounds, add string sounds, and bass. And one day he showed me, he put his floppy disk drive in, he'd play to show me this song he'd been working on. And it was a beat, you know, like he had a whole beat in there. And I'd never seen that before. And it blew my mind. I was like, hold on, you could make the whole song yourself. So I got the chord Trinity because I think it was a cheaper version of the Triton. But I bought that used on Craigslist like the next week, just based on that interaction with him. And so that got me started in the hip hop production back in like, you know, junior high. And so there, you know, like I said, I went to school for saxophone and I was always into jazz, but I was never really listening to a lot of jazz. Even though I knew you had to be a good jazz player. Like my jazz musician teacher,
there's like no great secret to it. It's like
there's no secret. You gotta like immerse yourself in the language, just like any language. If you want to learn Spanish, you can't just sit there and read a Spanish book and try to take lessons that way. You have to go and speak to people. And so it always kind of felt funny that they told me, like, if you want to be good at jazz, you got to listen to jazz. And I was pretty good at jazz, but I wasn't really listening to jazz. And so I was like, okay, how can I make this like a little bit more like interesting for me personally? And again, like the reason I think I wasn't listening to a lot of jazz was sonically, it just wasn't hitting the same way as hip hop production. You know, like I said, with 808s hitting people's subwoofers in their trucks, you know, and the systems were just shaking, and that knock that would hit you in your chest. I only experienced that from hip hop, and especially from trap music. But very little of that came from jazz. Once in a while there'd be like this big, I remember like Herbie Hancock, when we were ever doing like Herbie Hancock in jazz band, like, Chameleon or Watermelon Man, that always had like the extra bit of, funk and edge to it. And I could appreciate that. Yeah. So that was like, okay, when I started seeing like Herbie Hancock being introduced into our jazz band, I was like, okay, so it is possible. Like, Chameleon gets everyone riled up. Like that one, it hits. Yeah. So, and it's funky and it's very, it's bass driven. So that was kind of like, and Herbie Hancock is great with fusing different genres as well. So that was kind of, I think, my first taste that, okay, jazz doesn't always have to be just like straight up and down jazz, Charlie Parker, jazz standards. It can have a little bit of a grit to it or an edge. So again, I was, doing saxophone in college, but also doing production. So it's heavily in hip hop production, but also wanting to continue to do saxophone just so I could keep learning music theory and just learning music. I love the history of music and all that. And then after college, like I said, I didn't really touch my saxophone for a while because I got very much into hip hop production. I started engineering at different studios in New York, Stadium Red, which is Just Blaze's then studio in Harlem. And so I was, around a lot of like the big, artists at the time. Like,
how did you break into
that side,
into the city? Like,
well, like, so that
like
was,
your story starts in Memphis, and I'm like, okay, now I get where the trap stuff comes from.
And then now I'm in Harlem,
and now I got to Harlem, and I'm just in studios making beats for people.
That's right. Yeah. So I went to school out in Western Mass at UMass Amherst, and then for a year after that, I went back where our parents were living. They moved from Memphis, Tennessee. My dad got a job transfer up to Boston, so that's why I went to school at UMass. It was like in-state tuition. He established residency. It was just cheaper to go to school there. And then for a year after school, I stayed and kind of worked in the restaurant scene for a while doing music. And I started interning at two different Boston studios. And mainly, I knew that I wanted to intern. No one was doing production interns. It was always, or internships. It was always engineering internships. And I thought it was a little strange because I knew I didn't really want to be an engineer, but I also knew if you wanted to be in a studio as an intern, you had to be an intern, an engineer intern. Yeah, it wasn't, no one was like trying to teach you the production side necessarily. They wanted you to like get their coffee and then like set up their Pro Tools sessions and plug in their signal chains and get the mics working. So I realized, okay, like if I'm going to get in this scene, let's do the engineering thing. So there was a couple small studios out in Boston to kind of get my feet wet. I took some courses out there with just like some private studio set up. This kind of a maniac of a guy who was like this huge, in hindsight, he was a maniac. I was fresh out of college.
Yeah, you
didn't he was like, better. I think he was high up in like Scientology.
Okay.
Which wasn't like, it hadn't blown up like it had with like the whole Tom Cruise movement yet. But he was like, he had little like alien sculptures everywhere. And I was like, okay, this guy's a little quirky, but
okay.
But yeah, he kind of
East Coast Scientology was a thing.
He was definitely into it. He had all the like Ron L. Hubbard, like
no kidding,
books on like a library.
In the studio.
He had his own, like, he had a pretty serious setup, but it was in his basement of his house in like the middle of like Norfolk, Massachusetts. But yeah, he kind of created his own like curriculum with like a binder that you study. And I would just be like grabbing the binder next to like the Ron L. Hubbard books and just like open it up and start learning it. But that was like my first like course, if you will, and into engineering. And then a couple of my good friends from college slowly made their way to New York. So I kind of figured, okay, I don't want to stay in Boston. Let me, there's definitely more of a music scene out in New York. Let's go explore that territory. And So a year later, I went out to New York. I ended up just looking on Craigslist for an engineering internship there. And that was these guys, Heavy Rock Music was their studio. They're called the Knox. They're kind of like a big, I don't want to say EDM, but like pop EDM world. They've got some hits out. But yeah, so they weren't big at the time, but they later became the Knox. And it was crazy because at the time, Benny Blanco, he's a good friend of them. He's like this super producer who's done everything from like Harry to like Kesha and Maroon 5. And he like come in the studio. He was 20 years old at the time, 21, and I'm like 24 at the time. It was wild. I think he had just done like a Britney Spears song or something when he came in, and I was like, holy shit, this guy's like a big deal. And like later, since then, he's done like 100 other like billboarding, #1 singles.
That's unreal.
Yeah. So I worked like loosely with them for a little bit. But that was more of like, they were just kind of doing their own thing. They had an artist named Samuel who they were developing. But from there, I got into real estate because I needed to like make money. So it put me on to this guy who was he had like a real estate firm. So I was doing the agent type of thing there. Meanwhile, I knew I wanted to go into like a bigger studio. Because these guys were just kind of smoking weed and drinking beers, and occasionally they would do some work, but it was fun. Don't get me wrong, but it wasn't like a real learning experience.
It's not. I know what you mean.
It wasn't. Yeah. So
it wasn't the grind that you were like ready to really.
Exactly. It wasn't gonna. And they had their own group. Like I could already see like these guys had like grown up together in high school. They were just, they had their shit together, but they were like kind of a family. But there was the studio, Stadium Red Studios. That one I'd heard Just Blaze. It's crazy. The guy, Claude, who was the owner at the time, he was 24 years old and created the Stadium Red Studios with 3 different rooms, an A, B, and C room, and hired Just Blaze to leave his baseline studios and come put his studio into Stadium Red, which is like mind blowing to think about in hindsight. The guy was 24 years old and was able to convince Just Blaze to come on board. So I applied for their internship. And I remember the first time I applied, they asked me, name your top 3 like your favorite engineers.
Oh.
And why? And I was like, dude, like, I mean, I know the engineering a little bit, but like to just throw me like a curveball, like at the time I had no idea names necessarily.
Yeah.
Like Jimmy Douglas was like loosely in the back of my mind because I knew he was like working with Timberland as his engineer. But after that, I was like, I
gotta come up with 3,
like 3, and why? It's like so like that kind of shut down. That was like our first question that shut me down instantly, and that was it. So I like didn't get that internship.
Yeah.
And then 6 months later, one of the guys at the real estate firm I was working at, he told me, oh, I've got an artist who works out at Stadium Red. Like she records there. And I was like, oh yeah, I tried to get an internship there, but I think they wanted someone who was like really a diehard engineer intern. And he goes, oh, I know that one of the owners, brush up on that knowledge or whatever. And then like, see if we can get you an interview again. So I was like, okay, cool. So I like studied like all the liner notes about engineers, and why they're great. And then I went back and when I went back to interview, I think at the time it must have been a phone interview because I don't think she'd seen me before, but I went back because she saw me again 6 months later. She'd be like, dude, you've already failed this asshole. So I went back and she asked me the question and I tried to look like a taken aback, like, 3 engineers.
Let me see.
And then I'm just like going through my Rolodex now and just like spitting out names, and so I got the internship. And it's funny to this day, I got close to this couple who owns the studio. I never like told them like, you guys like turned me down the first time, right?
Yeah, it's not a conversation I want to have either.
But it was kind of like a dumb thing on there. I don't say dumb, but like,
no, I know what you mean.
I know what they did. They were doing it because I think the issue that they were probably having was you had a lot of people that just heard that Just Blaze was there. And so they just want to be around Just Blaze.
You gotta like figure out how to like
to weed them out, right?
Yeah.
You got to weed out the Just Blaze groupies that are just engineers. Just producers who don't care at all about ever being an engineer. And that wasn't necessarily true for me. Like I couldn't rattle off engineers' names at the times, but like I knew for me, it wasn't just about just Blaze being there. I just wanted to like learn everything there was about recordings. I knew that to get my beats and music sounding good, I had to understand the mixing front. You know, those things go hand in hand. So I knew I wanted to engineer so I could make my own beats and production mix better and all those different things. So, and I ended up engineering for them. So it wasn't like just like a lost cause on their front either. But yeah, so that's how I got into that side. That was like the longest studio run as far as engineering goes. I think I interned for maybe a year, and then like a year and a half after that, I was doing like my own like assistant. You know, I would assistant engineer a session, or like maybe engineer like a small session of like rap. You know, most of the time it was rappers that were coming in there. Once in a blue moon, you had like a full band. Like I think the biggest session we had was like Wyclef Jean came in there for like we rented out for a month, and Rick Ross and Chris Brown came in there for like a week each. We had just Jay-Z and Beyonce came in there briefly because Just Blaze was playing them beats for Beyonce. And I guess she was pregnant at the time, which we didn't know, but it was funny to see them. But it was a good experience. And yeah, it only helped, you know, learning the engineering side only made my own music and production that much stronger because, you know, it's kind of like a cheat code. If you can mix your stuff better, it's going to present better. I mean, a lot of times producers think, oh, I don't need to learn the mixing side because the mix engineer is going to fix it all for me. But it's not, you know, you still have to make it sound presentable. And if you want it to hit hard, you have to know how to mix your music, because if it doesn't hit hard, it's not like everyone has this can see past it and go, oh, don't worry, it sounds kind of shitty right now, but I'm sure if we mix it, it's going to sound great.
Yeah, there's not just a few buttons. Like there's not an equation that instantly like, oh, now what you just thought of in your head is now exactly what everyone is listening to. For sure. And
even like mastering to a certain degree, like mastering sounds like it's a whole thing. I mean, it is obviously like there's a lot of science to it, but just at a base level, just like slapping a limiter on your output, your stereo output, and then like, you know, pushing your input into that and maybe knocking off like 2 or 3 dB and knowing that, okay, now I've got it pretty loud, like it's fairly competitive. Even that is worth knowing, because a lot of times these producers they'll send out beats and they're not even hitting the ceiling, let alone pushing into it at all. And so if your music is say 3 to 6 dB louder, your beat is 3 to 6 dB quieter, I should say, than the next person's, just psychologically, they've already proven if you have the same music and one's a little bit louder, the person, if you say which one do you like better, the person always points to the louder one.
It's always the louder one.
Yeah. So to assume like, oh, I'm not going to master it because someone will master it later, they can get past that. It's like maybe, but they also maybe just might pass up on it because the other person was louder and it just felt more compelling in that moment. So I kind of realized you need to learn a little bit at least of all those different elements. So, you know, I'm not even sure what the original question was, but that was my whole comment.
Well, I mean, it was like, how did you get to New York City? And
okay, there you go. That's how I got to
you also knew your shit, and that's how you stayed in New York City for a little bit.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. No, man, that's awesome. Cool. So you ended up like kind of like developing and learning some of the craft, and obviously got some awesome stories and experiences out of it, which is so cool. So like when you ended up, I guess let's back up to like the last couple of years, or fast forward to the last couple of years chronologically. You started like, how you ended up like doing, or I see all these like productions that you have like or popping up on Spotify and stuff on Instagram, and that's how I ended up seeing you. Like you did that single like with Augie Bello. And maybe that was just like a matter of like perfect timing, as he's like happening to like blow up like on social media too. Like, how did you bump into him? Is it really just like, yo, what do you think of this? You like it?
You know what it was in the beginning? So I started like thinking, okay, I want to release these trap jazz instrumentals probably about maybe 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago. I had no Instagram or social media presence. But I saw that obviously like, that's kind of like the wave. Like it's just like no one's really like exchanging business cards these days. It's like, what's your Instagram? So I just started combing through Instagram, and you know, it starts feeding you more people that are like the ones you've been searching out. And so at some point, I think I just kind of went down the rabbit hole of like, okay, I saw this saxophonist and that led me to this person, and that maybe I'd see who they're following and who they're reposting. And I started just taking notes of like, okay, here are some of the like big names that I'm seeing on like the Instagram circuit. And Augie Bello, obviously, is like a monster player. And then he has like the social media thing down pat.
Yeah,
I mean, he makes these like quirky, funny,
like
comedic bits.
I didn't even realize, like, as I was like watching him, not, you know, like you passively watch something that and you don't like make the connection that like all of a sudden like you're like either a fan or you're following. I'm just like, what is this guy doing? And then like 3 months later, I'm like, oh, that's what he's doing. Oh, man, that's so cool to watch. Like start from the bottom. Like that's
no, I mean he was killing it. He would do these like, you know, he'd like do the like Long Island accent. It's like Barbara, whoever it was, and grab the phone and like like throw the phone down, grab his
and then he's playing like it's not it like and it was like a gimmick for the whole package. That was I think what was so cool.
I mean it was brilliant because like that's the thing too. Like you know, you start learning. I took a little bit of like the, you know, marketing for IG, and it's always about like you got to reel somebody in like the first like 3 to 6 seconds. So like even if you just played some amazing riff in the first 3 to 6 seconds, that's not going to necessarily grab a lot of attention. And it might not even capture new attention because like maybe someone's just like scrolling Instagram because they want to be entertained. And they see someone playing good jazz or like, okay, whatever. But if you see someone shirtless talking like they're Barbara from Long Island, and then they're like throwing it down, grabbing a saxophone, like, wait, you're funny and you're kind of skilled at sax. Like, okay, let me like take this a little more seriously. So it was a brilliant move. I mean, I think when I first reached out to him, he probably had like, I think like maybe like 45,000 followers or 50,000. I think he's like somewhere like almost 100,000 now. I mean,
it spiked. It spiked.
So I mean, I reached out to him on Instagram. He was actually one of the early ones, I think. Actually, he really was one of the early ones I reached out to. I did the first song "Fix," which was like the first release I did on Spotify, with a guy named Benjamin Drazen. How did I find him? He was local. Somebody, when I was living in Brooklyn, I think gave me his name. I think it was just like someone I'd known a few sax players from school, and I'd reach out to them to see if they knew anyone in New York, and they told me about this guy. And he's not even on social media, unfortunately. I mean, I always told him he should kind of market himself out there, but he has no interest in doing that. But he came over, and I just kind of told him the idea for it. Fix is like, it's definitely not trap. It's more, it kind of has more of a, I say boom bap lightly. I'm not saying I'm not a huge boom bap fan, but that's not like my production style. But it had more of like kind of like an organic, almost like the Roots, you know, it's just like a very organic drum sound, but it still hit. It still had 808 underneath it, so like would shake a system. And it was kind of a little bit more R&B based. So because I figured, okay, if I can make it a little more R&B based, a little bit more chordal, that should at least err on the side of like, there's a 9th chord in there, or there's like a 7th chord.
Something
it gives you more of,
the player to grab onto. It
gives you more to grab onto than just like, you know, a low note and then like a minor third, and then hey, go to town, have at it, you know. So I had him come over, and I kind of told him the idea for it and everything, and I just had him record in my bedroom like 3 or 4 takes straight through. And I wasn't sure, like I knew he was a great player, and I was like, I don't know if this is gonna work, but let me see. And then I went through that system of just kind of like going through each take, and I would just highlight moments, almost kind of like the same way if you were sampling a record. You kind of get in that mindset of like, you know, if you've ever watched someone sample, or even like take like reverse engineer a sample, sometimes you'll find this crazy sample, or not even know it was a sample, and you'll go, oh, like I don't know if you've ever been to the website called whosampled.com.
Yes.
Dude, it's amazing. And you wouldn't even know that some of these things are samples.
And now all of a sudden I'm like, wait, there's 36 samples in
36 samples. And like you'll take some random song like an ASAP Rocky song that has just some weird like little 3-second loop in there that you weren't even thinking was necessarily a sample. And it turns out it was. And then you find, and it'll tell you, okay, here's the original song, and that sample occurred at, you know, 3 minutes and 22 seconds.
It's unreal. It's like a whole other rabbit hole of like,
and so if you get into that habit of like researching samples, then you start listening to those songs, and then when the sample occurs, those 3 seconds occur, you kind of get that ear for like, oh, I can kind of see why that was attracted to that producer. And so that starts becoming a little bit more of how I was looking at the solo. So like, you know, he might solo 3 takes. I would go through each take, and maybe there's a part of it where he does something and then it kind of goes off the rails a little bit, really going outside the chord changes, which is probably totally fine in like a jazz, you know, standard or whatever.
Yeah.
But for this, it was just, I could just feel that it was going to lose a lot of people's interest and just maybe feel just a little too forced for like what this fusion is. So I would notice, okay, here's like something kind of melodic. Maybe it has some chromaticism, a little bit of, you know, chromatic closures and some bebop language. Okay, that works. Let me, you know, highlight that little 2 bars or a bar and a half region and keep it moving. Okay, another little snippet here. And then, you know, like just piece those together. So I have a good bar and a half on the downbeat. But now I need something to start on the next bar. Oh, here's something that starts on the and of 4 leading into a bar. Let me grab that and I'll put that as the next bar. And then I just kind of keep shifting those like a puzzle. And then all of a sudden that first song, I was like, wow, like this actually came together sounding nicely, you know? And I was even noticing, okay, like I think on that song, I gave him an idea for the chorus. So that was, like I said, that was my kind of my litmus test for if the beat was going to work. I would try to see, okay, can I play a sax lick or, you know, some kind of riff over the chorus that was catchy and would work. And so I found one that worked for that beat. I showed it to him. He replayed it just so it kind of matched his sound. And then on the last take he did, I said, okay, just go crazy, play a lot of altissimo, growl, you know, really amp it up. And then I ended up using a lot of that higher energy stuff for his last chorus. So it actually I don't think I even used the chorus lick for the last chorus. It was just kind of like rearranging some of the crazier riffs that he was playing. And maybe I'd repeat them out. If it was like a catchy riff, I'd repeat it out a couple times. And that felt like a new chorus. And even like, you know, I might find like a little riff he did that was catchy, but it was like a lower octave. And I would find that, okay, if I place that underneath as like a second track, that almost becomes like a backing track, like kind of like a call and response track.
Yeah. No,
and exactly. So, you know, it wasn't something I had any idea was going to happen at the time, but you just kind of start making do with what you're given, and you just it kind of leads you to whatever it's going to be. And so that was like, okay, this is like the aha moment that this could work out. And now, like, let's just push it more into the trap world. Because again, this was a little bit more loosely based. It was more like a neo soul bit. What's that?
Dipping your toes in, like
dip my toes. It was a little more neo soul because I knew that like if it had like a D'Angelo vibe to it, like you can make that work. Anyone can solo over a D'Angelo beat. So now I was like, okay, now let me see if I can do trap, like just straight up like a trap track, you know, that whoever, like a little baby would jump on, or whoever's hot right now, the baby, you know. Let's see, you know, Kendrick Lamar, like let's see if I can get something where if you just took off the saxophone, the beat, I wanted the beats to stand up to whatever was hot on the radio right now. So if you remove the sax over the chorus and the sax over the verses, I want those beats to be competitive with whatever hottest rapper is looking for. And that was kind of the barometer for like, okay, is this going to work? You know, because a lot of times the stuff I was hearing that was hip hop and jazz combined, like I said, there's a lot of boom bap, which is fine. But that starts kind of leaning towards like lo-fi music, which is cool for what it is, but that's just not what I was trying to do. I wanted it to really be mainstream sounding, trap sounding, current hip hop. But yeah, I reached out to Augie and kind of told him the idea, and I sent him a couple tracks, and he recorded to the Scan, which was the first song that we did together. And that one, he sent me 3 tracks back, and that same process. I mean, he's a monster player, and so I just grabbed kind of my favorite moments and pieced them together. And then on the chorus on that one, I remember I posted on Instagram. I think it was just something I was doing when I was making that beat for Scan. I remember like transposing it up and down. So I went up like a whole tone and down a whole tone. And they both sounded good, interesting, you know? And I was like, well, like how do you know which is the one to do, because they all sound good. Like you raise it up a second time, you're like, that sounds great. And you go down, that has a whole other vibe. You're like, that sounds great too. And then I'm like, are there always just 12 great other options that I'm not even exploring every time I make a beat? And so when I posted that, I had it as like a carousel slide or whatever on Instagram. And I wrote in the caption, like, you guys let me know which one's your favorite. Is it the first, second, or third key? And people, I think, like, it was majority, it was like 1 and 2 is like their favorite.
Interesting.
And so I was like, you know, let me see if I can combine those somehow. So then on the chorus section, I took the other favorite, and so I raised it up a whole tone, and I made that the chorus. So like, I can't remember what key it is. Say it's in D minor, and then for the verses, and when the chorus occurs, it goes up to E minor, and then it goes back down after those 8 bars to D minor. But I didn't give Augie that. He just had the straight D minor version. So I like had to pitch shift his.
Oh, that was going to be my next question. Like, so you had to.
Yeah, so I pitched his sax part up for that chorus. I gave him the chorus line. Again, I made a chorus melody on that. He replayed it, and I just pitched it up. And if you pitch something up or down, like a whole tone, you can get away with it. If you go any more than that, it starts introducing kind of weird artifacts. And
it
doesn't sound very realistic.
Just moving too much for sure.
Yeah. But that was tricky because I remember when I pitched it up, I mean, you can't just have it feel like the whole song just pitched up for no reason.
Yeah.
So I remember like whatever his last lick was during the verse, I like probably manually pitched up a couple notes up or down to like maneuver
to help it feel like he was navigating into the next.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of like this leading line.
Yeah.
And it worked out. So, you know, it's just kind of trial and error, but those things are always kind of like the best surprises, I guess.
It's so funny because like, as you're saying it, like I haven't listened to the track in probably like a month. And like, as soon as you talked about like moving up, I'm like, oh yeah, that's like what like gravitated me to like want to listen to it again. Like something like you keep using the word like sonically, like when you're talking about sound, and I feel like that's such a great way to explain things, and there's just something sonically that happens when it moves up at that point. It's funny too because a lot of beats don't change keys like that. But ironically, there was a whole movement of this producer. I don't know if you've heard of producer Lex Luger. No. He did a lot of like early like Waka Flocka Flames, like Hard in the Paint, and like Rick Ross, BMF, but a lot of like huge trap songs back in the day. And his whole thing was actually he would do like some eerie melody for 4 bars, and then he would just transpose it up for like, I don't know if he went up a whole tone or like a minor third, but he would like shift it up a little bit, and then he would shift it back down. And that was his whole thing. It was just like 4 bars, whole shift up, 4 bars back down. And in some ways, like, I don't know if I was like thinking Lex Luger when I was doing that. For me, it was just interesting to hear a new key for the chorus. But you know, it's just like a perfect example of someone like him, kind of that was his niche, was like, or his niche was just to like move it up and down and create and just change the texture that way, which was kind of revolutionary in trap music at the time. But, yeah, right. Oh, that is cool. That's awesome. So like I also hear you kind of like mentioning how like you're not so into like lo-fi and boom bap, and even though you're obviously like still willing to use elements to like create beats and experiment with sounds. So when I started investigating, like I guess I heard Girl from Rio by Anita, right? And I'm like, oh, this is cool. And like what actually got me was I saw all these people on social media like bashing, like, I don't know if they were jazz tryhards or what, but like people just like shitting on it. And that totally made me like polarize my opinion on it instantly. And I'm like, screw this. Like, what are you? And then like I started like digging into like Girl from Ipanema, and now I'm like, oh my God, you guys really are probably tryhards, because anyone that has an opinion on like Girl from Ipanema being borrowed to be used in like a pop hip hop track, it's just such a poser, like based off of the whole history of how the song was basically like, it's the most popular like recorded song and like on earth, or the second most. And
That's
like,
what I heard. I had no idea. It's crazy.
yeah, I didn't either. But I mean, when you think about it, you hear it, like it's everywhere.
Yeah.
But so like I went down this rabbit hole of like the history behind the song and like where like it was just how it like transitioned from Brazil to America and how like just jazzers like traditionalized and like just changed everything and didn't change everything, but they made it their own, which is like a part of music is we take other songs or we take things and elements we like and repurpose them for our own like joy, I guess. Like that's what
they kind of like westernized it in some
exactly
way,
but and then like if you really do like go like into even what they were doing like in like for bossa nova, like that was a reappropriation of like these jazz elements and turning them into like Brazilian music. And so like it's just this giant melting pot of these ideas.
It's like a circle.
It's like who stole from what first? It's such an interesting like vibe.
You sampled from me, I sampled from you.
Yeah,
and you sampled from me again.
And then we take it all the way over here and we make all this money off of it. And then 50 years later, someone else resamples it. And now we have all these guys that don't even, I don't know. It's just so it's been a really interesting like process as I've been looking into it. But then I got into the whole like, well, what is trap music? And so I love hip hop and I've like been listening to it and I perform it and I play it and like I always refer to trap music and like I understand what trap music is, but then like I started falling into this like secondary rabbit hole of like where did it start from? What did it like come out of? And I really, it kind of made me rethink my entire like perspective on like what I had listened to like growing up, because like I was from like upstate New York and you know, it was before Spotify or anything. So like you listen to what was on the radio or what like your like cool in the know friend knows about that exists already. And so like all I was really listening to was like East Coast stuff because it was all like East Coast, West Coast. And and it's so ironic that like when we started talking, how like you're talking about how you're from Memphis and like the like 3-6 Mafia and all this stuff. I never listened to anything down south.
No, we're total opposite. I literally didn't listen to any East Coast music.
Like it's literally it was Rakim, like Eric B, like like that's Jay-Z, like Biggie, like that was it. And and like you made fun of anyone that was listening to like Snoop Dogg and stuff like that. But like no one was even talking until like Outkast and stuff started playing on the radio. No one was talking about like any of the music down south. That's true. And I'm sure it was in your guys' conversations all the time, like you said, like growing up. But like the whole like borrowing and moving all the sounds around, like what I guess in my investigation, like thus far of like the origins of like trap and like where it came from and these beats, like what it seems that made it so successful is like the openness to trying new things that like all of those artists down south were doing as opposed to like East Coast, West Coast vibes. And so like when you're talking about like boom bap and like lo-fi, I guess I'm trying to engineer the question in my head after giving way too much exposition.
You're trying to ask me why I don't like lo-fi?
No. I guess it's like how do you think like West Coast is like all about like these synth like creations.
There's a lot of like synth bass, like there's a lot of funk. Like I feel like
I guess that's what it is. Yeah, it's too. It's like borrowing from this West Coast, almost like West Coast jazzy funk feel. But then like you have this entire like culture trying out like this like the goal down south is like playing in the club, dancing in the club, like and so like those songs it sounded like the beats were getting created down south, whereas the beats on East Coast, West Coast vibes were being sampled constantly.
I mean, I think definitely for like the East Coast music was for sure. I mean, everyone was up there was like sampling James Brown. I think one of the James Brown drum breaks is like the most sampled drum break of all time for hip hop. And so it was like a 2-bar drum break that they would just take those kick drum. They would isolate the kick drum, isolate the snare, the hi-hat, rearranged that, and then like hundreds of songs came out from just those drum sounds. And then from there, once you get those drum sounds, they would throw them into like a, the Akai MPC, and then they would just play them out on the pads. And then the Akai had its own swing like algorithms.
Yeah, features.
So you could just play it quantized out normally, a straight, pattern or whatever, and then you could just twist the swing knob to like 53%, and now it's got a little bit of like a swing flair to it. And then from there, they would just take another sample that they got from whatever, a lot of soul records they would sample from, some jazz, and then throw that on there. And then it had like this natural like swing element to it, but it was very much sampled. And that kind of became, I think, the foundation for a lot of like the East Coast beats. Whereas in the South, it was much more like the Roland 808 sampler was kind of, or the drum machine, that was at the root of most of it. So that was a lot. And that's kind of why the 808 kick and bass sound is, obviously now Atlanta's kind of running the hip hop game.
808 is king.
808 is king, and 808's almost been around. 808 was like my favorite sound back in the day, and that was like 20 years ago, and it still is not going anywhere. Like no one, you can't. Now even country songs and pop songs have 808 sound.
It's on everything. Yeah.
It's everything. So down there, they weren't swinging it because they just had the straight. It was just 16 notes, and you would just throw it in and play it that way, and it was just quantized very rigidly on the 16th grid. But that was just, you had that 808 sounding hi-hat with the open hi-hat sound, the 808 kick drum, which was super bassy and like had all those sub frequencies in there that would kind of rattle the subwoofer, and that classic 808 rim shot and snare drum sound. And then you've got millions of songs based off that. And a lot of times with the trap music, they would just get a lot of them, they were taking the chord trinities, the tritons, the motifs, just like these big keyboards, and they would just throw whatever their stock sounds. The stock sounds were great on there, but they would just, maybe a lot of it was like piano based. You just kind of find like a piano melody, maybe add some strings to it. You got the 808 covering the bass, and then that was the beat. And there was some sampling going on, but not necessarily as much. And if it was sampled, I feel like it was a lot more. They would sample maybe like a quick texture here and there, but it wasn't like they were sampling entire chord patterns.
Yeah, it was like the beat wasn't being created based off of the sample. Like the sample was just an added texture.
Yeah. Ironically, I didn't know until like, a few years back, I love Dr. Dre, and I remember researching some of his beats, and I didn't realize how heavily like sampled his music was. A lot of like Snoop Dogg's like, the next episode and all this kind of stuff. Like that was like a full, if you hear the original sample, it's like almost like that's the song. And he just kind of like heightened the kick drum sound and heightened the snare drum sound, or, like what's the difference he did with like Eminem, like all that stuff was just, it's just like, he was a crazy record digger. He would take these obscure records from like all over the world, which is also admirable because you think about like how many hours of music from just different cultures was he listening to find that little 3-second snippet,
No, you had said before how like you all the samples that are being taken like from these little moments in these records that if you know the song from like the hip-hop track, you'd think that moment is like the moment of the song, but really it's just like, oh, that'd be great to put there.
It's just like it might have been like a quick like 3 seconds in the intro, and then the whole song changes for the other like 4 minutes, and he's like, no, I like that little 3-second intro.
I didn't really notice until so I did this paper on like the musical borrowings of Eric B and Rakim, and the Don't Sweat the Technique, which I didn't really write about at all, but like the bass line, the don't, that's like in the middle of a bass solo of like a pop song from the 70s.
Oh, wow.
And that's just like, and the solo is like not rhythmic like that. And there's just this random pause where he like takes a break to get a new idea. And it's just like this weird moment in time that does not fit the rest of the song. And this guy's just like, we're going to use this.
I know. It's amazing, honestly, to go down. And it's funny because if sometimes you show somebody, like if you showed someone the next episode sample that Dr. Dre used, it's so easy to go, oh, well, God, that was cheating. That was the whole song. He just took it And it feels like that in hindsight, maybe, but like go out there and try to find an amazing moment like that in some obscure record and make a huge hit out of it. It's not that easy. I mean, it sounds easy in hindsight, but I remember one of the most, I think one of the coolest sample, like when I was digging up how a record was made, was the Shook Ones Part 2 by Mobb Deep. So Havoc and Prodigy were in Mobb Deep. Havoc was like the main producer in that duo, but he recorded his gas stove, like the gas range, you know, when it makes that flickering sound when it's trying to start up your gas.
I feel like I've heard this story before.
So he used that. I posted about it a long time ago. I think it might still be on there.
Literally might be why.
Maybe you saw it, but he had that turned on. He recorded that little flicker and like pitched that up. That became the hi-hat sound. Then he like took some random fire engine was going off, some alarm was going off in some show. He took that and made that some kind of like siren background effect. But then he took a Herbie Hancock sample of Herbie playing 2 notes on the piano from some old like TV record. Like it was like a TV appearance, I think he did. He took those 2 notes and then he pitched them down like 12 semitones. So now it's like really slowed down. And there's a lot of like white noise in the background from like the AC units that were going off. But now that becomes like this like weird kind of eerie hiss. And he plays those 2 notes and then he like shifts it back up 3 semitones and then makes that the extension of the melody and then goes back down. And that becomes like this whole like 7-note melody that's super eerie. And you're listening to it going like, what instrument is this? Because it doesn't even sound like a piano anymore because it's gotten so pitched down. And then even then when it gets pitched back up a little bit to create the rest of the melody, you're hearing like all the background hiss and AC units shift up with it. And so that becomes kind of like odd to your ear. But it was just fascinating to see like what the creativity that came with some of this sampling. You know what I mean? I just never really understood. I was never a huge sampler personally. It gives you a new appreciation for it when you dig into it.
Yeah, no, it's like it's its own complete like skill. Like I know like people get really into like, is it music? Is it not music? Like, and I'm like, well, regardless of whatever your opinion is on it, it's like, it's hard. Like, and it takes like account, like I couldn't imagine how many hours of like study of like records.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's definitely like its own language of just how to like train your ear to listen to music to find moments because you know, I mean, that's kind of why it's interesting. Some of these YouTubers, I can't remember what the guy's name is now. He does, Andrew, what is his last name? He does this thing with producers on YouTube where he said he gives them a sample and all 4 producers are given that sample. And then the next day they present their creation with it. And it's just interesting to see how they flip it because one person might take this idea and one person might take this, or they might take the same idea, but they pitch it different ways or totally speed it up or slow it down different ways. So, you know, there's no real right or wrong way to do it, but anyone that says it's easy, I mean, you're fooling yourself. It's like anything. If someone listens to something and they go, oh, I can't believe that song's number 1. It's only 3 notes. Okay, here's 3 notes. Go have it. Let me see your Billboard charting song that you're going to make from it. It's tough, you know?
No, especially like since like we're in this time where people are listening, it's like everyone wants this like quick hit of like something new, something that they grab onto and they want to move on. And people act like it hasn't been like that all the time. Like 20 years ago, people were like, no one was listening to Mozart, like play like a symphony and then be like, okay, I want to hear that next week too. And then the week after that. It's like, well, okay, what's playing next week? Let's go.
No, I know it's true. I mean, and I think, in a lot of ways, like simplicity is kind of key. Like, you know, it's easy to, not easy, but sometimes people just overdo it. And I've been working kind of loosely talking to this producer T Minus, who's he reached out to me about just kind of maybe like doing some collaboration. And he's done a lot of huge records for like Drake and J. Cole and Nicki Minaj and all of them, Rick Ross, Lil Wayne. But he was telling me, listen, like less is more. Like he told me like when I was showing him one beat, he said to dumb it down. Dumbing it down is maybe a kind of a harsh oversimplification, but as far as hip hop goes, you need to have space for the artist. So
Yeah.
a lot of times I'm wanting to like put these like really complex chords down, and then like moving around, and it becomes too much. Like you need to carve out space for the artist, but it doesn't mean to like dumb it down in the sense that you can still have that complex chord, but maybe just find those notes that are key to that chord. So if it's like a, you know, some kind of like flatted ninth chord, you can keep the root, you can keep the flatted ninth, and maybe just the fifth, but take out the seventh. You can take out the third.
It's so counterintuitive if you have like any like theoretical background, like classical form of training, like it's like you don't need it. And because the whole thing with like being trained that way is it's great to learn, but like unless you like bear yourself into it for years and then realize, oh, I don't actually need to do any of that to do what I want. It's it's hard to be all of a sudden like, oh, you don't even need the root there.
Just
have that flat nine there and then the fifth, and then get over it.
And it's you know, and it applies to all genres too. I remember even someone talking about Miles Davis, and they were like, you know, it's not even necessarily the notes that he plays, but it's the notes that he doesn't play, or it's like where he puts his rests. Like sometimes his space is like the most important thing.
The ambiguity makes it interesting sometimes, or most of the time. It's yeah. So when you think like trap music, like what's more important, the snare or the 808?
Oh, man.
Or the hi-hat or the 808? I forget the snare. The snare has to be.
I would say
you need that.
I would say, I mean, that's tough. I mean, you definitely need a snare for sure. I would say snare is going to be most important.
Yeah, like I can't. That's why I was like, that's a silly.
I would say personally, the 808 is going to be more important because I feel like that low bass that hits you in your chest, that shakes your system with a hard hitting snare, like that's just the root of it. I mean, you can make anything off of that. I think the hi-hat's great too, obviously, but it's like more of like the icing on the cake because it's just
the ornamentation, right? Like
yeah.
Do you feel like I don't know, there was a while where I was trying to do like I was just trying to like make my own covers of stuff and like mess around with Logic and create some beats like to solo over. And I was like looking into like just like easy how-to YouTube guides, and I'm listening to guys talk about like how easy it is to mess around with the snare, or not the snare, the hi-hat, and like pitch it up and pitch it down, and you just put in these, and I'm like, you're making it sound so not important. Like like you make it just like, and I guess it, like I started listening like I went down from everything from like TI to like earlier stuff like 3-6 Mafia, and I'm listening to the hi-hat stuff and everything. And the earlier you go, the more precise it seems like it is in its moments when it's used. And I feel like now when you're listening to it, it's just like it's everywhere. And like, do you feel like it's just like overused as like a crutch, or I don't know?
Not necessarily. I mean, back then it was definitely like you could almost just, they have a like a note repeat button, and that's just like you hit it and you say, okay, I want the note to repeat on 8th notes or 16th notes, and you could literally hit the hi-hat and just have it and just become 16th notes. And there's plenty of songs that's just all it is. They just run 16th notes the entire song. And then maybe you have another one where it runs the 16th notes, and then that last 16th note before the beat, they throw a 30-second note in there, and it does a little quick little run or roll, and that's it. But then you have other songs where it's like much more syncopated, where maybe it's like they only do like the upbeats, or maybe it's like an upbeat here and a downbeat here, and then like a quick roll here, and it's very syncopated. And then that kind of maybe like gives it like a different bounce too. So it just depends. I think the newest thing they're doing is there's a lot more pitching of hi-hats, which was never really a thing before. So now it's not as much just to have it do a pattern, but it's like maybe you have the hi-hat, run 3 16th notes, but then you do like this quick roll of like 30-second notes. There's like 8 in a row, and they slowly pitch up, and they slowly pitch down. Or like you have the, you have a 16th note run, and then you have it drop down like 3 or 4 semitones, and then it goes down there a couple times. And so it almost becomes like it's almost like treated almost like an instrument in some ways, where you could kind of hear some pitching going on, and it has like its own. I remember it's funny, like sometimes you'll hear, like when I was in New York, you'd hear people's music playing on their headphones while you're in the subway, and you would know a song. The hi-hat would come through more than any other instrument if you're just hearing something through the headphones. And it'd be funny to hear a song and go, oh, I know that song just based on the hi-hat.
The hi-hat.
So sometimes that was like something different, because before it was like you would never know. You just hear that and you're okay, that could be a million.
It could be any song. Yeah.
But now it's like you're hearing that syncopation with that little roll. Oh yeah, that roll is very like catchy. I remember that as a thing. So in some ways it's being treated more like I said, as like an instrument, which can be cool, you know, and in some ways it just mixes it up a little bit.
Yeah. What is it about like trap beats that you think has made them kind of like overtake like everything, is like becoming almost like this standard, and not just like hip hop, but like like it's in everything. Like like Girl from Rio is not like, it's a hip hop song. But like, you know, you talk to a 12-year-old and they're like, it's pop music. And I think that pop music and hip hop music are basically interchangeable right now. But like, why do you think these beats are everywhere? Everybody's consuming.
I mean, I think it's just the energy so trap music is definitely rooted in like that 808, you know, the 808 drum machine. And I think that energy is just so unique. It's just hard to escape it. I mean, it encompasses the full sonic range. There's, you know, you love sonics, right? So it's like, you know, from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, you know, you got your 808 bass, and that's playing as low as the human ear can hear, which is 20 hertz, and it's occupying up to like, say, 100 hertz. And so it's doing, you know, giving you that visceral reaction where it's like rattling your chest. And then it has like the knock of the kick, which is in like the 200 hertz range, the 250 range. And then you got the hi-hats that are up super high, and then you got that snare drum. And it's very crisp, and it has a lot of transient in the attack. So like that snare drum is very short and it hits you hard. So I don't know. I just think that energy, I mean, eventually it'll probably phase out and it'll, you know, adapt to something else. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's just like an energy. People always want their drums to hit, you know, that's just all people always want drums to knock. And that 808 drum machine just does it. And you know, at the end of the day, the 808 bass, it's not, I mean, it is revolutionary, but at the same time, you can create that sound. You just get a sine wave and you play a low sine wave, 30 hertz, and you add a little bit of a distortion effect to it, and that kind of gives it some of the like upper harmonics, that crunch. And that allows you to hear it. Yeah, that allows you to hear it on systems that aren't, because I mean, most people's systems, no earbuds are playing 30 hertz. So like, unless you have a subwoofer, 12-inch subwoofer, you're not going to hear that. But as soon as you add a distortion effect to it, now you're starting to get like that crunch and those upper harmonics that go into like the 300 hertz range.
Actually, now that you say that, it makes me wonder, like, maybe that's part of it, is like so much of our listening like isn't in like these kind of headphones. Like we're listening to earbuds and like you know, on like Apple earbuds. Like so it's almost like the way we listen to music has made it so that we gravitate towards those sounds, because how do we get the bass? We need to hear the bass. We need to feel that crunch. And if you're listening to these little tweeters, like,
I know. And I mean, you know, going back to the engineering side, there's tricks you can do, because a lot of times the raw 808 doesn't have a lot of the upper harmonics. So a lot of the new producers realize, like, I want my song to still sound good if you're playing off the iPhone speaker or if you're playing off the iPhone earpods. And so what they'll do is they started crunching up those bass notes even more by adding additional distortion pedals. Like they'll get guitar pedals that have some distortion on it, or they'll add saturation tapes to it, and anything they can get to like infuse those upper harmonics so that you can still hear that bass on a laptop speaker. Even if it's just subconsciously, you might not even be hearing anything below 100 hertz.
You fill it in. You literally fill it in.
You fill it in. And there is actually some kind of like psychological, I remember looking at, there's like psychological phenomenon where people think they are hearing this really low bass just because of the fact that they're hearing all the upper harmonics that a really low bass would create. given it was being distorted.
Yeah.
So now you don't even have to have it anymore, but like your body
you just need like the top of the envelope, like
and your ear fills in the gaps and goes, okay, there must be some really intense low bass going on right now, even though it's not there in the moment, because you're listening on a laptop, that's pretty limited in terms of range. But
and it's not like people are aware of like that happening. So like whereas like, because I feel like once I started like investing in like higher quality sound stuff, like once you become aware that it exists, it like ruins the experience of everything else. But like if you don't know, like that. There's so many times where I have someone like reach out to me and they're like, I want to get some headphones. And I was like, no, you don't. Like you really don't. Like it's not.
I know. I mean, I finish all my mixes. I always listen. I go back and I email the track to myself, and I just go on the Apple headphones. I have Apple headphones that I only use for just referencing my mixes on, because I don't want to get them sweaty at the gym or anything. I want to make sure they're pure. Like this is what like 95% of people are going to be listening to it on. So like if it doesn't sound good here, go back and fix it. And so like maybe I'll realize, oh, like my bass, it's been sounding great when I'm listening to them on the monitors with these 8-inch woofers on it. But if I throw it on the Apple headphones or ear pods, it's just like the bass is almost non-existent. So I have to go back and then like maybe add more distortion or saturation, to kind of bump up those frequencies. And then I'll go back and listen again and make sure it still sounds present on those smaller headphones and iPhone speakers and laptop speakers and all that. So yeah, you have to like, it is like, I think a lot of the reason, it's almost like that was, people probably added distortion to 808s because it was just something fun to do and it sounded good. And then it stayed because people go, oh, but this is just resonating more with the average consumer because they're hearing it on speakers that don't have a lot of bass, but now you've given them the feeling of that energy that wasn't maybe there before. So
it's like, oh, that hits so much as you're listening to your AirPods.
Exactly. No one's afraid of clipping. If going back to T-, he was like, he doesn't even care if his mixes go into the red. Like before, that was so unorthodox to have your mix ever start clipping and peaking into the red zone, and he doesn't even mind it because it's like now that has become like a sound. That digital distortion has become its own kind of unique sound that's becoming trendy or whatever. So I mean, everyone's always kind of finding new tricks, and then the ones that work are kind of here to stay. And I think going into like why 808s are going into like the pop music and even more into country has been like the funniest one, because it used to be those. Like going back to, growing up in Memphis, I was always around country music. So I listened to a decent amount of country until like 2002 when I moved out of there, and I haven't really followed it since. But if I listen to new country now, it's crazy. Like everyone's using 808s and like the 808 snares and the finger snaps and hi-hats in modern country music. Which was like, it used to be if you like country, you hated hip hop. If you like hip hop, you hated country, and those worlds never gelled, But now they've kind of found their own marriage in some way.
And I feel like that's like just what's happening is everything's just interacting with each other, and like if you have this like I don't know, Puritan like perspective on any genre, you're either like, I mean, it's fine if you're obsessed with like this one point in time. Like we all have our like nostalgia that like we can't get over or get past. But like, what's wrong with hearing a country song that bumps? Like, why? Who can't? Why can't that exist? I get it sounds strange, like, but it doesn't sound strange if you've never heard country before. You're just like, oh wow.
Whenever you have someone that's like, oh, I don't listen to any country music after 2001, it's like, if someone says anything remotely similar to that, I'm just like, I can't even take you seriously, because like at that point, like you have to be open-minded if you're going to really appreciate music. If you have all these rules on like what you will and won't listen to, it's like you've already kind of painted yourself into a box, and that's like the opposite of like what creativity is about, So.
As far as like tempo, there like, are there hard lines on like where the beat needs to be?
As far as like popular BPMs, like
like, is there?
I mean, there's definitely there are trends to it. I remember when I was first starting off, like 85 to 95 BPM, beats per minute. That was kind of the tempo. And that was a lot of like Little John when he was making big hits back in the day. A lot of his songs were in that range. And it's funny now, it's got like everything right now is like 135 to 145 BPM, which is a huge shift.
That is not the same.
But at the same time, it's also half, like you're feeling that in halftime.
Yeah, they're speeding it up, but it's like,
so they're speeding it up to get a lot more like the faster syncopation, but then the snare drum is technically hitting half speed. So it's actually hitting it like if it was at 70 BPM.
Yeah, their little turnaround is like in eight measures, even though
and then also the weird part to it is like, so you have the so truly it's not really 140. It's actually slowed down to 70. But I say 140 because I even personally would put my BPM at 140 because you want to feel it with that bounce. Like you want to be nodding your head at 140. You don't want to be like nodding your head at 70. Like that doesn't give you that same energy.
Yeah.
So you got it at 140, the BPM's clicking at that speed. And then that's why you hear a lot of like snares will be hitting on that slower 2 and 4. But then in between that, you've got these little like offbeat snares happening. So it's like, you might have it clicking at 2 and 4, but then it's like, you have this in between.
Yeah.
And so that becomes like, okay, even though it feels like it could have been halftime, there's more energy going on in between that. So that gives you that nod where like, you're not going to nod slow because there's so much in between motion that it forces you to kind of nod at it.
Yeah,
at
the forward motion is there. So it's pushing you.
So it pushes it. Yeah. And then you'll get like, another trick to that too is like you maybe throw in like an open hi-hat on the in-between notes. So if it's like, the kick's happening at 1 and the snare's happening at 2, in between you throw an open hi-hat, which is technically hitting on like a faster 1 and 2. So like if the tempo is here and the hi-hat's, going, that's going to also make you like, it almost feels like that could have subconsciously been the faster 2 and 4 snare was lying, but really in between that is like the slower snare. It's just a lot of like messing around with syncopation and kind of tricking the brain into feeling a faster tempo, even though technically you could call it the slower tempo because that snare is halftime.
Yeah.
But there's so much more emotion.
And so often like the vocalizations that are happening are dealing in the halftime feel.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they're doing double time stuff. And then you're like, wait, but it's not double time, or is it double time?
I know. Well, and then you got, and like the whole thing that Migos, the rap group Migos started was like, I'm not gonna say they started it, but they definitely really leaned into it heavy. It was like that triplet motion of rapping. So everything's triplet, 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 triplet. And so that, you're feeling triplets now. So you have to nod your head there because you're not going to nod every 6 notes. Triplets. Yeah. Triplet, triplet, triplet.
Yeah.
So that kind of became its own sound that they capitalized on and flow. And then now people are arranging that in different ways and finding ways to like create space within that triplet feel. And, or go back to like a straight rigid 8th note or 16th note flow in between there. And that becomes like its own way of, that's almost kind of the way that the hi-hats were becoming. Like you had the 16th notes going, but then you have like maybe like a 30-second note run and it would pitch down. It's kind of the same way. You've got like, some triplet motion going on, and then maybe you have just regular rigid 16th notes and you go back and that becomes its own sound just off of the rhythm,
No, that's
but,
yeah. No, I love like analyzing this stuff.
Oh yeah. I mean, I overanalyze to a degree that's probably not healthy. I guess I actually stopped taking music theory in college at a certain level because I was realizing like I can go down this rabbit hole to the point where it's like not healthy, where I'm just gonna like look at everything like a math formula.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. There was I ended up like when I was doing my last paper on Eric B and Rakim, and it was all about like, is he swinging it? Like, because the whole thing was like, is he borrowing from jazz? Because he says he borrows from jazz.
Yeah.
And I spent like hours transcribing, and I'm like, is this swung or is it not swung? Like, and then he's swinging it, and then he goes back. I'm like, well, he must be, I know he's like, he knows what swinging is. It's not like he's accidentally swinging. So like, I was literally calling people up. I'm like, can you FaceTime quick? I need to talk to you. Like, am I crazy? Is this?
Yeah.
So
I know. I mean, swing and all that. I should do more of that because I've always loved like that when it's like kind of ambiguous too, as far as like what's really being swung. Like, because at the end of the day, if you get 16th notes or 8th notes really, and you take that 8th note pattern and you, for example, I like to put my hi-hats behind the beat just slightly. So I'll nudge the whole, even if it's rigid, I'll nudge it behind the beat a little bit, like 20 milliseconds. But then, if you get the 8th notes, if you keep nudging it to a point, it almost now, the first one you could say is just a little delayed. And then the second one now is kind of a swung note because it's behind the beat.
Yeah.
So yeah. You kind of created swing, even though everything is still very rigid, but it's just slid a little bit behind the beat. And I noticed even like Dr. Dre was a big influence on me early on, because I was so used to everything being so quantized with, like Southern hip hop. But then you'd hear him do stuff where he had like this push pull feel where like the kick would happen, but then the snare was almost like it felt like early a little bit, but then like the in between hi-hats would sometimes feel behind the beat. And so it was like kind of like a lazy feel there. So that someone described it as like a push pull feel. And that was such a good way of describing it, because it's like part of you is like, okay, like the snare is feeling urgent because it's really wanting to go, really ready to go.
And it's that melding, I guess, like because he was actually like sampling more than we realized. It's not like he was sitting there like creating these two like slightly off. It's like he was blending them, and it's like what happens when you have like a real group performing together is like it's never perfectly in time unless someone did something after the fact.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. I mean, that's like the human, in Logic, they have a humanized feel, and that's all it does is it just kind of like alters the rhythm.
Like, let's fix this up.
Behind them. Yeah, and it gives you a human feel. But he would lean into that even harder to the point where it's like, and that would make me try to figure out, okay, how much can I like push this in between hi-hat sound behind the beat before it just starts either feeling wrong or feels like actually like now you just swung it. Let me get it between like an actual swung note and in between like a rigid quantized note. And then that kind of gives you that push pull. I mean, D'Angelo and like Neo Soul does it amazingly. Like if you like go back to like D'Angelo records, like the Voodoo album and like that track Untitled, you had that, I think, Questlove was on most of the album playing drums. And he was, hitting the kick drum, and he has the rim shot on Untitled. But then you have like the chords play on the electric piano, and it's like it almost feels like it's a full 16th note behind the beat. And so now it's like you're like, okay, is the drummer playing early or not? No, I guess the drummer he's right on, but the rest of the band and the bass is just playing so far behind the beat that it just kind of makes you, and then it makes you almost nod your head more because you're like internally. Yeah, you're internally trying to like, all right, let's keep going. Like, let's get this moving. And like, now you're like, it just like, I don't know, that was like a whole Neo Soul was like a whole other like eye-opening experience for me to see that.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, no, it's so funny how like just slight changes in the feel can completely like, just
if you quantize those songs, it wouldn't even be like what they were. It wouldn't even be Neo Soul anymore. It just becomes something totally different.
Yeah. Listen, I don't want to take up too much of your time. Like this has been a super fun conversation.
Sure.
But like, as far like, do you have anything that's like coming out soon that you?
So yeah, I mean, I've got another song coming out soon. I haven't titled it yet. I haven't actually talked about it before, but all of my titles, I hate thinking of titles for these songs. So far, all the titles have been contronyms, which I didn't know what a contronym was before. But it's a word that can mean one thing, and then it can also mean the total opposite.
Okay.
For example, like dust could be something like you can dust off particles, or you can dust on confectionery sugar onto a cake. So it's like that type of thing. So, I believe it Untitled because I got to figure out what's the next available contronym that's out there.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's Untitled for now.
That's cool.
Yeah. But yeah, so I'm still working on the trap jazz releases, and then I've also been kind of going back to making just actual hip hop for placements. Like I said, I've been working with T-, so I do want to see what placements we can maybe get together on some newer records. But then, just being experimental, I started doing, I got this Zoom, the H5 recorder.
I saw that.
Yeah, just because I was experimenting with recording different sounds, which is fun. It's almost, I did it because it was like, okay, this could be interesting. I saw people do it, like these content creators would go out and they would sample themselves hitting various random objects around the house and seeing what they could make with it. And it was like, it works twofold. It's like, it's interesting because you're experimenting, but then it's also interesting for the consumer because they're like, it's more captivating as far as
it's like, what is he gonna do with that?
Yeah. So I was like, okay, let me and I released a video recently and people really responded to that. So I said, okay, I'll keep doing it because like, why not? Like, it's been fun. It's experimental, like I said, for me. And then it gives me some other form of content to put out there. So between releasing the trap jazz records, I'll keep releasing those. People like those. And then also I'll probably keep doing some covers. I did a couple covers recently where I just get a popular song. I think the last one I did was that Kid Leroy, Not Sober. I took his beat and then just soloed on that.
Yeah.
I figured, at least that kind of gives people who maybe don't know my music a chance to go, oh, I didn't think about a jazz sax player being on top of that beat, but it kind of works. And then maybe that gets them down to like want to check out the original music. So those are like the three things I've been thinking, okay, I'll keep my focus on those for now. So.
No, that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I love listening to your stuff. Like your beats are like just quality. Like when I like happen to fall across like your the Christmas time is here stuff, like I was just like, this is gonna be so much fun.
Yeah. That was funny. I mean, that was like super random, like last minute. I think I put it out like it actually didn't even release on Spotify until like after Christmas.
Yeah, no, I remember. Yeah.
I think they had some new policy where it used to be like I would upload to Spotify like 24 hours before its due date, like super behind schedule. But now they have a whole new thing where it's like they really want like 4 to 6 weeks, I think, before they will release it. So that one unfortunately came out after Christmas. But that one was funny because I remember thinking, okay, like I'm sure I can do some kind of Christmas cover. What would be like a popular song that would be fun to try? And the Christmas Time Is Here, I think, I can't remember if it's not in a minor key, but it goes to minor chords.
Yeah.
It's helpful for hip hop. So my test for that was, okay, whenever there's a minor or whenever there's a major chord, I'm going to take out the third. So you're not going to know it's major or minor. So I'll keep it ambiguous that way. So if there was a minor chord, I left it minor. If it was major, I just took out the third, so you don't know it's major.
Open. Yeah.
And it did have some like complex chord changes. I remember like looking up the tabs to it.
Yeah.
Okay, it has
those,
like some.
Yeah, those Christmas songs are not. They're not easy. Like if you think like you're about to do a Christmas gig and it's the week before and you're trying to learn a bunch of stuff, it's not.
There's like some altered chords in
not
there.
Fun.
And like,
you can't just
secondary dominance.
You can't wander all of a sudden every time you solo, you just end up doing the melody because you're just like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I didn't look this up.
Yeah, no. So like I was like, if it had like an altered chord with like a flatted ninth, I was like, okay, let me take. So it's a flatted ninth C chord. Like I'll take the C for the bass and I'll put that like D flat up there, and that has its own dissonance. I'm not gonna even put the major third in there. So like. I was trying to see if I could do it so that if I didn't throw the melody on, like maybe those chords could sound eerie enough that it sounds like a trap beat. And it kind of worked. Like if you don't hear the melody, that intro, you're like, okay, this could actually be like a regular trap song.
Yeah.
And then also you throw in that like major third melody and you're like, okay, now I know this is a Christmas song. But for a second, it's kind of disguised. So it worked.
No, man, that was a lot of fun. If you definitely do think about it again, once Christmas time comes around, that was fun.
Yeah, maybe it'll get that one going viral next year.
Oh yeah. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Cool. No, man. But I appreciate it. It was definitely helpful. Just like even talking through just some stuff, like helping.
Yeah, it's fun for sure.
Visualize digging through. Where I wanted to go with this next blog post. I feel like I'm going to end up doing like a whole deep dive into like the origins of like trap beats, like separately.
We should do it again. It's fun to like, even just talking about it. It's just like, you don't even realize maybe what you've been like subconsciously thinking and hearing. And so
yeah, that the conversation is so helpful. Like it's just yeah. It really like helps you figure out where you're actually at in your head. Yeah. It's like whenever I try to like put it on paper, it's just like a bunch of like ink grossly like, dripping down, and then you have to like carve out the real words and
try to carve out the interesting stuff.
Yeah. So like talking through it first definitely helps. Yeah, man.
This has been fun. Now I got to go to my dentist appointment. I haven't been since before COVID. So
oh no,
the opposite of fun is about to occur.
Well, good luck with your teeth. But again, thank you very much. Let
me know if you're doing this again. We'll hop on another call.
Yeah, for sure. Next time I come up with something to bounce some ideas off, I'll definitely reach out. Okay.
Sounds good. All right, man. Take care.
See ya.